Hey, Retcon Raider here. It has been a while since the last time I actually got around to doing a retro this early in the month. Makes sense, I suppose. I'm usually right in the middle of some big ongoing project, so I end up pushing the retro back until the very end of the month. I mean, I do enjoy doing these retrospectives, but there's no denying it's one of my, least enthusiastically received series. It only really tends to appeal to my most hardcore viewers, or my patrons, or the folks who just have a morbid curiosity about how all this YouTube nonsense really works. Regardless, under normal circumstances it would be a lower priority, but in this particular case, we've actually found ourselves between major projects. Obviously, our first season for Phoenix Point has just wrapped a couple of days ago, and we're still about 2 weeks out from the launch for Wasteland 3. We will, of course, be talking about both of those games in just a moment, but you guys know how this works. We'll start things off by taking a look at the numbers for July. Now, looking at the analytics, we can actually see some slight improvement from June to July. Throughout the month, we pulled in a grand total of roughly 155 new subscribers, 96,000 views, and 19,400 hours worth of watch time. It's nothing overly dramatic, we've certainly done better, but it definitely reversed the slow downward trend that we were seeing back in the months leading up to it. That's not really surprising, given that July also saw our slow transition from two relatively underperforming series back over to a couple of old fan favorites. Again, I will reiterate, I don't regret sticking with games like Gears and Chimera Squad, but it does show that there's a price to pay whenever I ignore the trends and don't cooperate with the almighty YouTube algorithms. It really just comes down to whether or not I am comfortable paying that price, and again, we will be coming back to that in just a moment. At any rate, that brings us over to the top 10 list for July. And I will admit, I'm actually a little surprised by the results. I mean, obviously, we still had Wasteland 3 topping the charts, no surprises there, but I wasn't really expecting our return to Phoenix Point to gain so much traction so quickly. Look, I love Phoenix Point. I think it's a fun and intriguing game, despite its stumbles and obvious imperfections, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what they end up doing with it in the future. But I also try to maintain a realistic perspective. I mean, half the reason I run my monthly polls and follow the analytics so closely is so I can try to predict how successful each of these series will be. In this particular case, we're 6 months past the game's launch, the game is obviously still struggling to find its footing, and enthusiasm in the polls was definitely dropping. But despite that, the Phoenix Point series hit the ground running. When it came to choosing which series to relaunch first, I deliberately chose Kingmaker, because it generally seems to have a much more enthusiastic following. It's one of the enduring staples for the channel at this point. I generally consider a series to be reasonably successful as long as it's maintaining an average of roughly 1,000 views per episode, and Pathfinder Kingmaker usually has no problem passing that threshold, so it seemed like the safe and logical choice. That said, if you go ahead and look at the monthly top 10 for July, you might notice something. That's right, a distinct lack of Pathfinder Kingmaker. That's not to say it underperformed. As predicted, it's still pulling an average of roughly 1,000 views per episode. Rather, it didn't end up making it onto the list because Phoenix Point just completely blew it out of the water. Seriously, I wasn't sure what to expect when I relaunched Phoenix Point, but I don't think this was it. Like I said, I love the game, but I also try to temper my expectations with data and analytics. If I treat games like Gears and Chimera Squad as a cautionary tale about the perils of ignoring the numbers, Phoenix Point is the exact opposite. For whatever reason, despite all the data I had collected and the trends I had predicted, the series just exploded right out of the starting gate. As of the moment I'm recording this, the final 11 episodes of the series are averaging about 2,000 views apiece, roughly twice the numbers we're seeing with Pathfinder Kingmaker, with some inexplicably going as high as 3,000 views per episode. Again, well beyond my expectations. Look, I'm certainly not complaining. It's great. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little baffled. As near as I can figure, and this is something I was going to touch on last month, but I ran out of time, I think YouTube gives my channel preferential treatment when it comes to certain games. I mean, obviously, YouTube has been pushing the idea of channel specialization onto content creators for several months now. I don't know the specifics of how it all works, but I do know it's why so many of the larger content creators are suddenly splintering their content over a series of increasingly specialized sub-channels. In my particular case, I'm technically in the gaming category, but I'm more specifically in the strategy and RPG subcategory. However, I seem to pull more weight when it comes to XCOM-likes and story-driven isometric CRPGs. It might be why, despite being a pretty small channel, I mean, let's admit it, I still tend to gain some decent traction with most of the games that I play. Some series are obviously more successful than others, but this is far from the first time I've looked at the numbers and found something that just really didn't seem to make sense, at least not based on prior trends and analytics. That said, I suppose it does make sense, at least in retrospect. I've been talking about Phoenix Point on a pretty regular basis over the past 3 years. It's essentially one of the main reasons that I started this channel in the first place. I think since I first started up back in 2017, I've uploaded a grand total of roughly 720 videos. And of those, roughly 140 of them have been about Phoenix Point. Questionable quality aside, I think by sheer volume alone, that literally does make me the #1 channel for Phoenix Point content on YouTube. It would certainly help explain why YouTube seems to give me a little special treatment when it comes to that sort of content. And while it obviously doesn't really help me now, given that I just officially wrapped Season 1, it does make me curious about what kind of numbers we'll end up seeing when I eventually return to Phoenix Point for our inevitable Season 2. Of course, while it is tempting to continue trying to milk the series for short-term gain, there are obvious downsides when it comes to over-specialization. I like Phoenix Point, I do plan on returning to Phoenix Point, but I don't want it to be the only game I end up playing. Or, more specifically, I don't want the YouTube algorithm to think that it's the only sort of content I make that's worth promoting. I don't want to go into too much detail here, but getting pigeonholed by the YouTube algorithm is a very real and constant danger. There's another content creator that I know in passing. We used to do tabletop gaming together, and he actually got into YouTube a couple of years before I did. He's also much better at it than I am and much more successful, but that's neither here nor there. Unfortunately, he also fell into that trap of basically focusing his full attention on a single game, the one that was, of course, getting the best numbers on an episode-by-episode basis. It worked great for the short term. YouTube actively promoted his content, and he saw incredible growth over his first couple of years. But eventually, it just comes down to a matter of long-term sustainability. How long can you possibly play a single game before you just start running out of content that's worth exploring? Even worse, how long can you keep playing a single game before you just start getting tired of it? I have to imagine that Twitch and YouTube are full of horror stories about minor E-celebrities in the gaming community who just burned out and got tired of playing that one game they were best known for playing. I mean, what do you do then? The algorithms are trained to only promote that kind of content from you. And trying to branch out to something else, even if it's a very similar game in the same exact genre, can end up being a frustrating uphill struggle. You want to do what works, what makes your channel grow and brings in the money that you need to help cover your overhead, but then you end up being actively punished when you stray away from that one thing that definitely works in hopes of finding something else that might end up working just as well, or something that you just have more fun doing. It's not an ideal situation. But at the same time, I can also understand YouTube's side of the equation. They are a business, so obviously it's in their nature to want to pursue the safest and easiest source of potential revenue, and thus to actively encourage their content creators to focus on the genres or subgenres or specific game that seems to get the best results. Anyway, I got a little off topic there, but obviously it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about. While I do appreciate the fact that YouTube seems to give me some extra weight when it comes to the strategy and CRPG genre in general, and games like Kingmaker and Phoenix Point in particular, I also don't want it to get to the point where the algorithm starts actively discouraging me from exploring other similar games. Which, I suppose, ultimately is just a whole lot of words to explain why it's going to be at least a few months before we come back to Phoenix Point. Maybe half a year. We are seeing a new DLC for Phoenix Point later this month, and I do want to see what it has to offer, but not enough to risk turning this into a Phoenix Point channel, if that makes sense. Instead, we'll be switching tracks and jumping onto an entirely new project as soon as I can get my hands on Wasteland 3. Obviously, that's another series that YouTube does give me a little preferential treatment with, likely because of the relative success of my alpha and beta runs, and I think that's just the sort of thing I need to help maintain a slightly broader categorization as far as the algorithms and channel specializations go. I'm fine with being a channel known for specifically focusing on XCOM likes and story-driven CRPGs, with a little Lovecraft and lore analysis on the side. In this particular case, Wasteland 3 is an almost perfect fit for that, because it's both an XCOM-like and a story-driven CRPG. Not to mention that it also conveniently overlaps with my Fallout Van Buren analysis series, something else that I do intend to get back to at some point, though I will also say that I have to constantly fight the urge to just go back and start that series over. I'd love to take another run at it and see if I can just do it better. Anyway, I have wandered way off topic, so I think we're just going to pull the plug here and wrap things up. I did actually have a script for this retro, but I ended up kind of wandering off of it about 4 paragraphs in. I'll just take the other stuff I haven't gotten to yet, and we'll talk about that next month. It's more of an August retrospective thing anyway. So, as usual, I'd like to wind things down by thanking you, the viewers, both for continuing to support the channel by watching, liking, and/or commenting on my various videos, but also for making it this far into a pretty disjointed and rambling retro. I know I'm not always the easiest guy to listen to, so I do appreciate your dedication. I'd also like to thank the Raiders, the fine folks who populate my Patreon page, and help keep the channel funded. It's thanks to them that I can continue to dedicate so much of my time towards recording and editing an array of increasingly rushed and amateurish videos, though I'm not sure I'll ever get to the point of being able to keep up with some of these other content creators. I mean, geez, I can barely keep up with 20 videos a month, so I can't imagine how some of these other guys are jamming out 40 or even 50 videos in a single month. Regardless, Special thanks to my honorary raiders for the month of July: A Normal Joe, A Dragon 707, Austin Fagan, Benjamin Gray, Brad Quinn, Cecil Kane, CRXCRVS, Ethan Vonderweed, Flamebeard, ICU Uwu, Kim S. Jensen, Lady Shayna, Mark Giemza, Mark Richards, Matt Leetzen, Maximilian Monk, Mozzie Melton, Misha, Rob H., Scott Brown, and Tom Edward Idland. And extra special thanks to my veteran raiders for the month of July: AdriRaven, Alois, Ash, Ben Hollingshead, Drakiith, Eric Teichmiller, Exsellsior, James Trimmier, Jace Orcblood, Laura and Mike, Leroy Nukenson, Lima, Loki K, Loolaloo, Matthew Holmquist, Mildly Nuclear, Nod Goblin Nico, Sir Skelibate, Terry Williams, The Link King, Tomasz Piatkowski, and Woe77. Oh, and as usual, special mention to Lord Revenant, Captain Nerd, and Captain Valen, as well as our newest arrival, Nathan Welch Jr., who's getting here just in time for our impending expedition into the Colorado wastes. It's thanks to support from folks like them that I can continue focusing on playing the games that I want to play, rather than the games that YouTube occasionally tries to prod me towards playing. Though, I will admit, sometimes there is some overlap, as we obviously saw with Phoenix Point, and as I'm sure we will end up seeing with Wasteland 3. Of course, if you would like to join the ranks of the illustrious raiders, then feel free to check out the links to my PayPal and Patreon accounts in the description below. Or that, weird new applause button that's apparently appearing on most of my videos now. I still have no idea exactly how that thing works, but I guess it's some sort of glorified tip jar? I guess? I don't know. As always, this is of course a fairly small channel, and pretty much all the money I make goes right back into the costs associated with creating content and running the channel. Or, you know, eating and living in a house. So the rewards for patronage are pretty modest. Still, depending on the tier you choose, it can net you things like shoutouts, access to my Patreon updates and polls, early access to the occasional video, and preferential placement on my occasional waiting lists, as we saw with games like Gears Tactics and Phoenix Point, and as we'll be seeing with Wasteland 3. At any rate, I think I actually went a little over my monthly time allotment for begging this month, so let us hastily bring this train wreck to an end. This is Retcon Raider, signing off. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your continued support. Oh, and if you need to contact me for any reason, feel free to leave a comment on just about any of my videos. You can also contact me directly over on Discord, Facebook, Patreon, Twitter, or my official email address. As always, links are in the description.